Big show coming up for you on the Locked On Nets podcast. We're going to visit the idea that Steve Nash could be on the hot seat as the Brooklyn Nets head coach. Then we'll tap into the young developing talent on this roster, if any of them should be a part of deadline deals to improve this team. And ultimately, where the Nets stand in the East, Doug, as they continue to try to keep their heads above water, where we were right and we wish we had been wrong.
Yeah, that's just kind of the story of this thing. Like I said, we grade out Nash here a little bit, talk about what the scenario has been there, talk about just sort of where this team has come, where it's going, and what to expect going forward. Hate being right about some of this stuff, but can't help it sometimes. It's just what you get with the podcast. We're going to talk about it all, but first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Oh, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie, owner-operator, DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, FanDuel, DraftKings. He's got you covered. I am Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. And we are back in, Doug. No game until they take on Phoenix later tonight. But in the meantime, we're going to focus in on Steve Nash and where he stands as the Brooklyn Nets head coach. Take a look at some of the young developing talent and if there's any impact around the trade deadline with them. And then ultimately, maybe raise a little bit of a pat on the back for ourselves, as some of the writing on the wall around the struggles for the Brooklyn Nets was already there prior to the Kevin Durant injury.
Yeah, like you want to pat yourself on the back, but then also realize, like, by doing that, you got an idea right, but it's like not good for the team. So I don't know where we
pat myself on the back, kick myself in the, it's all relative when you're breaking this stuff down. But first and foremost, we get into what feels like the most current thing coming out of that last game. We had talked about it. Steve Nash, the mismanagement of the opportunity to challenge on the Kessler-Edwards foul call against Steph Curry, which effectively felt like was the key moment that broke the end of the game where the Nets could have possibly pulled that one out. Should, as we say here, if you're watching on YouTube, should Steve Nash be on the hot seat? It's not just based off that one moment, but where do we kind of stand here? Knowing as well, by the way, that the rest did come out afterwards and say, yeah, we got that wrong.
Yeah, in their post-game report, they said that was just clearly not a foul on Kessler. So, doesn't help you win the game in retrospect.
Well, but it does. One of the all-time terrible systems of, like, when you're watching it in real time and you hear the announcer say that's not a foul, that's what they're trying to get rid of in the NBA. When you and I come on the podcast afterwards and say it's not a foul, why isn't Steve Nash challenging that? There has to be a better NBA system to having someone just go, hey, friend, not a foul. You can go ahead and move past that and just say this is what would have been, right, or whatever you would have used terminology. The offensive player leaned in, trying to receive contact from the defender. It's a no call. The ball's going the other way. Instead, they make a call. It just hangs out there, and now it's left in the balance, whether or not good head coaching or otherwise, for somebody else to correct the issue that the refs are having.
Yeah, so anyway, he comes out of this game. It's a bad look for Nash for sure. I know that the fans and folks, we haven't really beat this drum too much, have been frustrated at times with Nash this season. I get it to some degree with some, sometimes some questionable rotational stuff, some like non-adherence to sticking with guys, even when it's like maybe not going so well. And, there's some examples of this. I think there's plenty of, maybe some kind of stagnated offense at times, even though you have really good players. So I think that there's definite criticisms that you can lay at his feet. I think in general, is he on the hot seat? The answer is probably a pretty easy no, despite a hardcore contingent of folks probably wanting it to be that case. And I think that's really pretty unfair way to look at this thing, because in the macro, has Nash made some micro mistakes? Yeah, I'm sure if you watch any coach over the course of a season, this will be the case for coaches. Fan bases love to complain about coaches more than anything else. Is the thing. They often don't know really what they're complaining about, except that when things are going bad, they think it's all the coach's fault. That's just sort of a time-honored NBA tradition. I think that in terms of where Nash is right now, it's almost like you have to still give him an incomplete on what's happened here, because I just don't. Yeah, he's made some mistakes. He's also just gotten dealt just an all-time bum hand for the first 2 seasons of coming in as a coach. Like, it's kind of all gone wrong in so many different ways that have nothing to do with him. Right? Like, they have like, injuries have nothing to do with Nash. You wanna say they played the guys too many minutes? Okay, I would call that more of an organizational failing. Like, but in terms of, like, if we run down the list of the main reasons the Nets have maybe, especially this year, underperformed expectation in terms of their record, almost none of it is Nash's fault, really. Like, can you win some stuff on the margins a little better? Probably, but it really wouldn't erase the core problems that really have nothing to do with him. So I think from a coaching perspective, this isn't me being an apologist either. Like, we were very critical of him last game. I get it.
Yeah.
Like, but I still think if you're being fair and balanced about it, like, you can't look at his performance overall and feel like you have a good handle on what the situation is, because so many things that would erase all the questions just have nothing at all to do with him.
Well, so there's the high level stuff, right? Like Kyrie Irving not being available to start the season, or
Right, like,
Harden.
that's not his fault. Like,
and if it is, my God, is he going to have real things to answer for? Right. Like, so you don't have Kyrie to start the season. That's the big one that we know. Then you can say, remember, you lost Kevin Durant for a week, 10 days there when he had to go into protocols. Then you lost James Harden with that. And if you want to go, big picture around this, and we've talked about it a number of times, and this has been something that we've harped on now. Joe Harris, by the way, getting injured too. Big component of it. You don't know that you're not going to have all these players for various stretches, and also that you don't necessarily have the best constructed roster to sustain some injuries like this, just in terms of, as we've always said, depth perimeter shooting, right? If you just had more and more shooters, even in the short term, you feel like you could survive that when you go, well, I still got 2 more guys I can throw in there with Harden and Patty Mills. Now with Kyrie and Patty Mills, or Kevin Durant, whatever, right? Any of those combinations, once you run out of some of the skill sets that you need, you can't manufacture percentages that guys just flat out do not hit.
yeah, like, I just don't really know. This is what I mean about incomplete. Like, you just can't look at the amount of games that have missed either by injury or just nonsense, right? Whatever, like, whatever the reason behind missing all these games. But, like, the Nets nonsense factor is, like, higher than most teams. It's the highest team in the league, like, whatever. Like, they have had so much, like, ridiculous drama around the team in just the first 2 years that, again, like, has nothing almost to do at all with anything in terms of basketball operations. But then you mentioned the roster too. This is a situation where the roster is purposely imbalanced around the superstars. Like, that's the point. That's the point around the construction of this team, is to have it be very, very top heavy in terms of talent. Like, that is a championship winning formula, by the way. It's like mostly the championship winning formula. Like, if your 3 best players are among the best players in the league, like, you are just going to be competing if they're all healthy. Like, that's the formula. The problem is, to do that, you have to make significant sacrifices really all the way down the chain, so that when you lose a guy or 2, or like 2.5, which is what kind of where they are at times here, it's just going to be so hard. It's just going to be so hard to make it up. And that's just really, and that I can't really fault him for that. Like, and so, because here's the other thing, like, look at the last game. There's another way to look at this and say, dude, they just played like an almost full strength Warriors team without, didn't have Draymond, and they had Kyrie and, like, essentially Patty Mills and spare parts.
Yep.
And could have almost won the game. Like, there's a world where you give them compliments for some of that stuff. So I just don't, again, I'm not apologizing here, but it's just so hard to fault him for some of these other things. And one more thing. If you look at, like, every team deals with injuries. Most teams that deal with tons of injuries around their very best players, especially when you have like 3 at the top, are just going to underperform the expectation. That's just pretty easy math. There's a few examples where they can kind of make it out of the mire. Almost all of them are that the team has like 2 superstars, maybe 1 or 2 are hurt, but because you only have 2, the rest of your roster is much more balanced. I'll give you 2 examples. The Clippers. The Clippers are without Paul George and for a long stretch now, and without Kyrie. God, I'm all over the place. Without Kawhi, for the whole season, they're a 500 team. Okay, if you look at the roster is much more balanced down the rest of the chain because they only have 2 superstars, right? Like, if they had 3, it was just a much harder road to hoe. And same with Denver. Like, they're without Jamal Murray, okay, and they're without Michael Porter. yeah, like those aren't guys that like they're all getting max money. And so like the other parts, Will Barton, Aaron Gordon, like to some degree Rivers, like these other Jeff Green, right? Like the parts are just a little bit better, right? Like they're just a little bit better. And so yes, every team deals with injuries, but almost no other team is constructed the way the Nets are, which is we all agreed was correct.
Right.
But it's just not working out right now.
And by the way, 3 roster spots occupied and then 3 superstar price tags occupied as well, which is what makes it harder to have talent behind them. Last thing that I'll throw in there too. It's very specific to this season. We're going to talk a little bit more about some other comps and then some of the younger players on this team as far as being underneath Steve Nash. But remember, if it's not Joe Harris, you could almost pick anybody else, maybe outside of Patty Mills with the way that he's performed this year. What if it had been Bruce Brown that went down? Right? Things look a lot different if you just have one more of those supporting cast members, and arguably, whether by price tag or by role, Joe Harris is effectively as important as Patty Mills has been this year. That's what Joe Harris had been for them in years past. So it does, yeah, listen, it does make sense. Again, to your point, when it's been bad, it's bad, and it's easy to criticize. I do think that there's a difference between criticizing a bad play, a bad game, a bad non-challenge, whatever, and then making that the referendum on the coach. Going to go into a little bit more of this, and then I want to get into some of these young players as well. But first, Doug, TurboTax.
Oh, tax season. Everyone knows what tax season is, and they can't throw any superlatives around tax season, but TurboTax has you covered. People think unusual circumstances like the last 2 years can mean complicated taxes, but for TurboTax experts, that's what makes things interesting. They love this stuff. We all have unique lives, whether you're invested in crypto for the first time this year. Hopefully you did it sooner and not before after this huge dip, or you own an up-and-coming small business or raising rambunctious twins. I checked 2 of those things, but not the third. Luckily, TurboTax Live has experts who can answer your tax questions, walk you through the whole process, or do your taxes for you start to finish. There you go. They help you get every deduction you deserve, no matter your unique situation. You can talk to a TurboTax Live expert through your phone or your computer without leaving the house. TurboTax Live experts there to help you whenever and however you need. If you need an extra hand your taxes off to them. They'll do it all for you. There you go. Bing, bang, boom. You're all done. To TurboTax Live experts, an interesting life can mean an even greater refund. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. You do your thing. They've got your taxes into it. TurboTax Live.
And of course, this episode is brought to you by our good friends at Rock Auto. You know, we've been talking about them a lot. That's because there's just an insane number of car parts. I've asked Doug before. Doug, how many car parts are there?
More than 6, less than 10,000.
See, and it's right in that wheelhouse somewhere. Probably split the difference. We don't know for sure. The bottom line is you can save time and money when you use Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from chain stores or a car dealership when you can just head over to rockauto.com. You look up your make, your model, you find the exact part you need. You know it's going to fit. You know it's going to be right. And you know you're going to be saving yourself time and money. They have everything that you could need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. That's 5 parts right there. So we know we're getting close to 6 and certainly moving beyond. You go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. You write "locked on" in the "how did you hear about us" box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So the other piece then, just to extend this a little bit on Nash, is I think, and I know you were looking at like some comps around head coaches who were former stars, right? Big names that moved to the bench in somewhat short order. But before we get to that, the thing that I think is easy to overlook is the fact that we're all excited about Kessler Edwards and what he's brought to the table. Some fans are absolutely losing their minds over Daron Sharp and what he can do. And we know that Cam Thomas is this microwave scorer we're all really enthusiastic about. Now, is it Sean Marks that drafted in this talent and put him in there? Yes. But guess what? If you're going to blame Steve Nash for things that aren't going well on the court, you have to give him a ton of praise and credit for developing these guys, because Kessler Edwards is now entrenched in the starting lineup. He's playing 35 plus minutes a night. He's a 3-and-D guy that the Nets desperately needed. And Daron Sharp, even for a player that by all accounts coming into the season, most scouts or, pundits were saying this is a long-term prospect for the Nets, but not someone you're going to see early and often. By necessity, he had to get utilized. But Nash has done a great job with him as well. And, Cam Thomas, I think, is obviously a little bit more sparse. But how can you not be a little more even-keeled on Nash, knowing what he's done with these young players?
Yeah, and some of it was by circumstance, right? Like the COVID situation forced a lot of these guys into the starting lineup or into the rotations. So you got longer looks at them, probably way ahead of whatever they thought the initial timeline was going to be. I think that he's had a good like pretty long leash with some of those guys in a way that, again, some of it was forced because they just needed it, but some of it's just like, hey, like, playing Kessler a lot of minutes has turned out to be the totally right move. Like,
Yeah.
he's had a quick hook with some of these other guys. Like Bembry gets a quick hook, Bruce Brown has gotten a quick hook. We saw guys like Millsap who are like so frustrated that they want to leave. And so, but usually around that, it's not like they were blowing the doors off anyway. He was like, this isn't working. We need to move on. So I don't know. Like, this is just one of those situations where this is why I keep going back to incomplete. Like, this is just an incomplete situation. Like, you can't give him an A+, but you really can't give him an F either. And so at that point, or a C, and I'm not going to name all the letters, even though I got three-fifths of the way there. But so you got your A's, you got your
B's,
A-.
your D's. We did.
Follow me here. We'll get through this. No. So, I just don't no. And then if you look at Nash, if you look at some other comparables or like other comps around this, it's like a little unprecedented to come into the league and just never coach. I know he had development stuff and he worked with the Warriors. Like, that wasn't even like really a full-time gig. He's worked with the Canadian national team. I get it. Like, he's been in and around basketball operations and stuff, but he's never sat on the coach's seat for a long time. The reason you don't get a lot of comps for this is because no one is really ever allowed to do it unless you are a superstar Hall of Famer, and your sort of popularity means that you kind of skip to the end of the line, like in terms of getting the gigs. In general, what's that?
Front of the line for being a superstar.
Yeah, front of the line, you know what I mean. In general, like, the track record on these guys actually isn't so bad if you look at it historically. And I won't go through the list of all the Hall of Famers that ever coached, but the more high profile, by the way, that ever coached and then like never were assistants, didn't do anything else, just became head coaches, right? The other list around it, I'm going to miss a couple here, but it's like, okay, guys like Steve Kerr. Now, Steve Kerr was the general manager of the Suns, went into broadcasting, came back, and obviously that's been a total success. Okay. Like, so you have to count that as a win.
I leave him as incomplete.
What's that?
I leave him incomplete.
Yeah, there you go. Still, we'll wait and see how it all turns out. Like Larry Bird came in and was instantly like, the team won a ton of games. He left with a winning record. It didn't last that long, and it was good. Other guys, let's say, so it was all right, Jason Kidd. Like, we saw how that worked out with the Nets. Like, he was pretty good his first year, right? 82 and 44. 44 and 38. And then goes on and has like a 500 career. I'd say like it's mostly worked with him. And he's got Dallas playing decent right now. And then there's like some high profile kind of disaster ones, like Magic Johnson totally stunk and lasted about 16 games with the Lakers. Isaiah Thomas, we saw he was bad as a coach and as a GM. So the old dual double threat there. And so I just think that, like, it's so hard to sometimes probably tell what these guys are going to bring, because you're kind of just going on how good they were on the basketball court and probably how good they were in like some kind of quasi interview that they had. Mm-hmm. And so I just don't know. And I guess like I'm kind of rambling with a point here, but it's just such a unique situation too, that it probably for a lot of these guys does just take time. Like, you never really coached. You never sat through all the ins and outs of a basketball situation. This is why it was so great to have D'Antoni last year. I think we saw the effects, and I think we've seen the effects of not having D'Antoni. I know I still got Jock Vaughn and some other guys. So I think it's like, this is the other thing. Look, the Nets are not the team you can say, hey, we just give it some time. We'll see how it works out. They're not in that mode, but you have to like factor that in a little bit and say, the dude's like not as is a season and a half of like full-time coaching. And they're just like, you have to expect some of this stuff to go wrong at times.
Well, that was you kind of just made that point there that I was going to bring up of like, the hard part is a lot of times when you are these high profile former player coming into coaching roles, you're usually stepping into a really good situation, right? It's you're taking over superstar talent, and either, even right now with this one, the premise was,
he did.
Yeah, but I mean, like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and then you go get James Harden. Like, you're brought in because you're going to be relatable to these superstars. You have shared experiences on the court. Like, that's the number one probably. There's this belief, and usually it is a lot of times point guard that end up becoming head coaches because they run the offense, they understand the way the game is working, etc. And you think that it can translate to X's and O's. But unlike when you're a rookie head coach for the Detroit Pistons, your leash can be a little bit longer, right? Like, you can get legs for a handful of years. I'm not picking on them, just any small market team, or the Nets. 5 years ago when they were in rebuilding mode, and Kenny Atkinson gets a look and he comes in and does pretty good. And then when you get to the point where you think you're going to really make this run, you have to start making decisions that are as much about on the basketball court as the personalities and the personnel and the players that you're going to bring into your organization. So these things, unfortunately, do take time. And usually in this kind of instance, you don't have time. So that's where it becomes a double-edged sword a little bit, I think, for Steve Nash, obviously.
Yeah, and like just to throw out another example, like Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers goes, another point guard, ex-player, goes basically right in and coaches right away with the Magic, right? And he's had a really pretty long career at this point, and it's been mostly successful. But what's been like a major criticism of Doc Rivers, like the in-game stuff has been kind of bad at times, right? He's lost some high-profile series because he didn't really execute very well on the coaching end at times. Like he's lost, I don't know, what's the record? He's like lost like the most conference finals game sevens or something like that, like in history. Yeah. And okay, at some point it becomes sort of a real thing. And he sort of stumbled there. Now he's lasted because he's great with the players. Like that's the other thing too. It's like, okay, well, how much does this stuff matter? Like at some point, being really great with the players ends up, because of your cachet, ends up really mattering. Like, where are we seeing this really falling apart now? Frank Vogel in LA. It's like, dude, is it Frank Vogel's fault? All this stuff, like they mismanaged the roster development, like unbelievably. No, but he's like not an ex-player. He won a championship, and everyone's kind of like, you could get out of here pretty soon. Like, it was like, if he was Steve Nash, like the conversation wouldn't have ramped up that quickly around him. It's like the star player stuff ends up giving you this little extra cachet that sometimes increases your leash around this stuff, or like you have a longer leash. So in general, I would say, like, overall, the track record, I would say pretty good around these guys. In terms of like coming in, Hall of Fame talent, big name, big personality or decent personality, whatever, managing stars, like that track record's good. So I think you take the swing 10 times out of 10. And that's the other thing. If you thought that Nash was a good hire at the time, which we did, it was basically based on the principle of, like, he had a really great career and he'll be really good with the superstars. Like, you can't have changed that. If that was the initial thesis behind why you thought he would be a good coach, which that's all it could have been. He had no track record as being a head coach. Then at this point, you can't really go back on that, I don't think, yet, because he has not gotten a chance to have the superstars fully at his disposal. That's it. So if that was the original thing, all right, I know we're going to hit a couple more of these things here. I got to talk to you first. There might be less football being played, but betonline.net has way more odds and info for this playoff season. From scores, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach, is going to land. Too soon, BetOnline. BetOnline is the #1 spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. We know we use these guys all the time. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your #1 online wagering destination. BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports and play your favorite games. BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, so quickly before we talk about kind of where the Nets are in the Eastern Conference right now, again, the proverbial pat on the back, kick in the rear, as we maybe knew something was coming, and it doesn't feel good to be right about it necessarily. But real quick, I mentioned there about the young talent and it developing for the Brooklyn Nets. We know the deadline is coming up. I mentioned last episode about Nicholas Claxton. I'm of the mindset of wanting to keep him, but understanding there's only so many things you can do to facilitate that change. We like to use stats when they help us make our point. And in this one, Raptor ratings offensively for the Brooklyn Nets. Where do you think that Day'Ron Sharpe stacks up right now?
His Raptor rating, I would guess it's actually really high on the team just because his points per minute are really, really good. And his offensive rebounding rate has been awesome, like among the best in the league for the minutes he's played. So I'm going to guess he's like, you asked me where he stacks up. I would say 5th. Fourth. 5th.
Final answer? Final answer 5. We lock him in. He is 5th. It goes and now
let me guess. It's some combination of Durant, Harden, Kyrie. I'm gonna say Aldridge and then Day'Ron, or is it Mills then Day'Ron?
It's Patty Mills, then Day'Ron, and LaMarcus Aldridge right there in 6th. So spot on analysis from Doug Norrie. You should follow him for Twitter. He's got great commentary. And now on the other side, quickly, I'm not going to bother asking you the question, but on the defensive side, Day'Ron Sharpe is 3rd on the team right now. Now, if I told you the two people that are ahead of him, it could get a little bit wishy-washy in terms of where you want to place the value on it. That's neither here nor there. The point is,
it's like the first two. It's like Blake and is it Blake?
I'll just tell you, it's Millsap. It's Millsap.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So neither here nor there. Overall Raptor ratings, though, for the team, he still stacks up there and ends up being Kevin Durant ahead of him. Day'Ron Sharpe is right there at the top of the list. The point being here is that he's obviously come on fast. He's developed very well. We know he's been off with the illness right now. He hasn't been playing enormous amount of minutes. Even Kessler Edwards, without doing the rope-a-dope there, he started fairly low rated on both ends of the floor. Some of those struggles early on. He's now starting to play basically even ball on both ends of the court. And I think this is where we would say the old eye test tells you that he's playing really good basketball and important basketball for the Nets. The last guy, though, the last key rookie is Cam Thomas. He's at the bottom, really, in both categories. And surprised. this is no, and again, eye test tells you this, right? Because he looks a little clunky, especially on defense. The offensive game, even still, is not as well rounded as it needs to be. Just on the idea of the deadline coming up here, if you need to facilitate something, I did have this thought ahead of the episode of, boy, you know what? Do we all get excited about what Cam Thomas can be, this microwave 3-level scorer? Of course we do. But unless you tell me that you think he's going to be a superstar in the league, 3-level scorers are the one thing that you can kind of replace that actually isn't critical to keep and hold on to, especially when you think you're looking to have Kyrie Irving and James Harden here long term. Do you think that he would have value to a team if you were looking to make one of these minor moves where you go, hey, in lieu of a pick, because we don't have a lot of those, we'd rather keep our assets. We'll give you a young, potentially, shooting guard, off-ball guard who could be a real scoring menace for you in this league for years to come.
Yeah, the issue, I think there's probably some teams that wouldn't mind seeing it. I'm not surprised that his Raptor rating is low because, for all the times we love to see the scoring when it comes, he kind of just doesn't do anything else on the court. There's no assists, basically. He can barely rebound. And so, I don't know. I'm just not surprised that rating. The defense is totally suspect. Sure. So I'm just not surprised that's low. The issue with him is, again, would you put him in a trade? I think no matter what, if you thought you were getting something back, the problem is he makes no money. You can't really package him anything. You got to send a bunch of other stuff out. And at that point, it's like you have to. This is why it's so hard to include these guys. They just don't make any money. And so I just don't know where you get left with them. And so, because basically any team that's shipping someone of value back to you, is some bad contract that plays on some bad up and coming team, right? And those guys are so few and far between, which is why we always see the same dudes completely put in every single trade right now. It's like, oh, is every team in the league going to trade for Kenrich Williams? It doesn't seem like it. There's only one of them, right? Is every team going to throw these guys in? It's like, you just can't do it. So I think I'd have no problem with it. I don't think he's some kind of future superstar, at least not in the iteration that we're seeing now. He's a really nice player. You drafted him well below his what his slot should have been if you had the season play out here. I think we all agree on that. But in terms of him being some kind of generational superstar that's up and coming, I don't think there's really a lot of evidence of that right now. So he's good for what he can do. He doesn't really do much else. He does do that one thing very well. Yep. And so I just think that's where you kind of have to slot him in right now. It's did they get us kind of a steal for where he was slotted in the draft? Definitely. Yeah. Did they pull out some future all-star in a really low draft slot? I don't think there's evidence that you can really point to that that's the case. And I'm projecting him out way off in the distance here. So I think that's kind of where I land with him right now.
Short-term, long-term, it's the kind of thing. Keep your eyes on that for the offseason when the Nets need to shuffle the deck and create some things around these superstars. Let's just talk about the standings then in the East before we get out of here. This is the happy to be right, but sad at the same time because
not happy to be right.
not happy to be right. I always want to be right, Doug, but I wish I wasn't right in this instance because the Brooklyn Nets, we know in recent games 2-5 over their last 7. We understand that. But you go back and look, and we have been saying this long before Kevin Durant got injured. You go back I took down the dates from December 25th to January 15th. They ran 500 ball, 6-6. And then they started to hit this rough patch with Kevin Durant going out and the road trip, etc. When you look at the Eastern Conference right now, there's some teams that look like they're trending in the wrong direction. And then there's some very clear teams that are coming for you, like the Boston Celtics. Has this already gone worse than you expected after Kevin Durant went down, just in terms of some of these very winnable games that you've come up short in?
No, this is pretty much what I expected. I think we made this prediction right away. We sounded some of the alarm bells at the time, and those alarm bells for the current, what they're dealing with now, those alarm bells were warranted. This is what we're seeing now. This is totally. I wish it was turning out different, but you can't look back at any of our previous comments about this we were just 100% spot on. Like this is what's going to happen. They're going into a very difficult part of their schedule without their best player. You're going to get Kyrie for only part of the games. They got a total luck box miracle that a lot of these games are away. That's just dumb luck. Like that is, and they're still losing some of them. And so, like, yeah, no, I'm not surprised even in the slightest. And thankfully, like the Wizards have just taken to become a total dumpster fire.
Yep.
And I mean, the Knicks just are gonna win this game they won this game against Sacramento, so they're gonna climb up a little bit. The Hawks, got Trey's hurt, so there's like other little things that are happening here that's like that are kind of minor wins for the Nets. I never root for injuries, but they are kind of minor wins for the Nets here. So in that case, it actually hasn't gone that's the only thing we were wrong, was like, hey, all these teams are gonna keep pushing here. Luckily, a few of them have gone a little bit into the mini tank in the short term, and that's actually helping the team. That's some of the Nets from like being in a real danger zone. But yeah, you can't say like we're not surprised. This is exactly what we thought was going to happen.
And I was hopeful that teams would beat up on one another, and that would kind of stem the tide a little bit. I think that's effectively what you've seen here. But to your point, right, the away games were supposed to be the buoy, and then James Harden doesn't play for a couple of them, and you're like, well, that wasn't part of the part of the making it through this was assuming and foolishly, I guess, that. Well, after the injuries we've sustained, there won't be any more injuries until we get everybody back healthy, and everything else with Kevin Durant's timeline, with Joe Harris's timeline. It'll be interesting to see how these games start to unfold here. And it starts with a game tonight, the Phoenix Suns. Difficult test to say. It hasn't been going great lately, but we can turn it around, no problem.
Can the Suns just like rest their guys for a game? They haven't basically done that all year. Yeah. Like, just, hey, don't, hey, this is where you go over there and you say, like, hey, Monty Williams, like, hey, have you seen how many minutes Chris Paul and Devin Booker are playing? You guys are 40-9. Take your foot off the gas a little bit. Let's see a lot of Elfrid Payton here, right? Let's see a little Elfrid Payton, Bismack Biyombo. I can't remember who. Campaign. Like, can't remember who was the rest of their bench here. Let's see some of those guys for a game and rest your superstars. Nothing to prove here. It's not the full strength team anyway. That's I don't think that's too much to ask. We've been dealt a lot of injuries.
4 guys on the court. Why 5? Why
the
5?
Suns are like the total opposite. The Suns haven't had Ayton got hurt, has been hurt for a little while, but like over the last 2 seasons, the Suns have like not had like no injuries at all to any of these guys. So I don't know, maybe the Nets can learn something too about not getting injured. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Head on over to YouTube, subscribe to that channel. We're pushing toward 1,000. We're well over 900 now. I feel like we're gonna hit 1,000 probably by mid-February or something like that. So be part of that group that gets us to 1,000. Like and subscribe over on Locked On Nets YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes.
So many teams need talented players to bring in. You mentioned a guy like Williams out there. It makes you wish that you could just have copies of them. The only problem is, when you make a copy of a copy and it's just not as sharp as the original, that's Doug Kinney. That's multiplicity.
Whew, man, I have no idea what you're talking about. All right, we're gonna get out of here. One of the all-time great poets. I didn't follow that. I'll listen back. I didn't follow that thread even a little. Okay, I'm sure it was great. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.